Hi, I'm Father Joel, and welcome to Pilgrim Priest. As we kick off Vocation's Awareness Weekend, I just want to say thank you for the way that you're living your vocation and inspiring others to do the same. Thanks also for tuning into Pilgrim Priest and for your support and encouragement. If you like us, give us a review and share us with your friends. God bless you. This weekend, we kick off National Vocations Awareness Week. And so many of you are probably thinking, I can tune out for the next 10 to 12 minutes because Father's going to try to recruit more priests. And that's not really true. In fact, I'm going to talk about 3 levels of vocation. And I think you'll notice as I talk about them that all 3 of these levels of vocation apply to you. So the first level of vocation is what we call the universal call to holiness, which sounds like some fancy protocol for cell phones or something, but it's actually ridiculously practical. The universal call to holiness means this, that we were made by love and for love. That human beings are made in the image and likeness of God, and God is love. And that means that we were made to love. Each and every one of us is lovable. In fact, we are already loved because the God who created us loved us into existence. It is His love for us that gives us our unfathomable value. And it's His love for us that motivated Him to offer His Son Jesus on the cross. But because we're made in God's image, and we're called to be in His likeness, that means that we too are called to self-giving love. And so behind all of the church's rules, behind all of the 10 commandments and the other laws that do this and don't do that, are the fundamental laws of love of God and love of our neighbor. That we should love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Quite simply because God is that lovable. And one day we'll be able to see Him face to face. For now, we kind of have to take the Scripture's word for it. We kind of have to take it on faith that God really is lovable and that He really does love us. And this is what we're called to. And this is not something that we really need to discern. When we were baptized, we were invited into God's family. We were made members of the community of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And we were invited to love. So in order for us to fulfill this first level of vocation, we really have to let God love us. I can't really love my neighbor until God has first loved me. Which is why St. Paul reminds us, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He said, you could see somebody dying for a good person, but we were sinners. We weren't worth it, and yet God still died for us. So in other words, we need to allow God to love us. And that's part of the point of Sunday Mass and the Holy Eucharist. It's us opening our hearts to receive God's love. It's us giving God permission to love us. It's only when we've allowed God to love us that we'll really realize how lovable we are and that we'll have the means to love our neighbor. So while this isn't something we have to discern, we know that we are called to self-giving love. The challenge here is that ongoing need to do it. So holiness is nothing more than allowing ourselves to totally become love. The saints were motivated completely by love. They were no longer motivated by fear. They were no longer motivated by what's in it for me, by selfishness. They were no longer motivated by the need to manipulate or control others or to avoid feeling hurt or rejected, because they could so live in God's love that they were able to totally be love in every interaction with every person. And this is holiness. Holiness is when we allow the love of God to transform every part of our life. When we become totally love. That is the call, the universal call to holiness. And it's a call of every Christian. It's a call of every single Christian. It is perhaps the most challenging of all levels of vocation. It's the one we need to always go back to. But that is the first level of vocation. The second level is that we get called to self-giving love in a particular way to a particular person. As a priest, I'm called to be an image of Jesus, the high priest, Jesus who we hear about in our second reading, who offers the perfect sacrifice for the salvation of the world. I do offer the perfect sacrifice, but it's not mine, it's Jesus. Jesus offers himself to the Father through me, or rather makes present once again, here and now in time and space, the one perfect offering that he made to the Father. And that's my role as a priest, is to be an instrument of Jesus, the high priest, of his love for his people. I'm called to love you as Christ loves his church, and to lay down my life for his church. The call of religious life is a call to live in total communion with Jesus, as we all will be in heaven. And so a religious is called to love Jesus like a spouse, like as if he were her husband. And in doing so shows how intensely Jesus loves each of us. And then a religious then loves others from this place as brothers and sisters, which is why we call them sister or brother when they're in religious life. And of course, marriage, we're called to love another human being. Just as flawed and imperfect as we are, it shows the mercy of Jesus when two human beings can continue to love each other patiently and kindly year in and year out. This is the second level, and this requires discernment. How is God calling me to love practically? Who is God calling me to love? What is the way that I incarnate the love of Jesus in my life? And that can shift when you lose your spouse to death or divorce, for example. There can be a new phase. For folks that are single and that are still called to self-giving love but don't have a particular person there, that can be an ongoing discernment as well. So this second level is a more permanent way that we incarnate the love of God in our place, in our time, in our unique way. And then the third level of vocation is the level in which we are called to self-giving love each and every day of our life. How do I love you now? Not just the church in general, but how do I love as a priest on Monday morning, November 4th, and Sunday, November 3rd? What does that look like practically? What does it look like for you to love your spouse? What does it look like for you to be a loving person in your place of work, or in your retirement community, or in your school? How do you incarnate the love of God into your everyday life? And obviously this level requires constant discernment, right? Like we know from those places, those permanent places, we kind of know the shape or the framework, but then it requires that ongoing challenge of loving in everyday life, loving the person who's in front of me, loving in the midst of the situation that didn't maybe go the way I wanted it to go, loving in the challenges that I face each and every day. This is that third level of vocation. It's that daily vocation. So we see that all of us are called to holiness. We are called to love God and our neighbor. And we don't have to discern that level. We just know that this is what we're called to. That second level is that more permanent way that we love a spouse, or that we love through religious life. And that is a way that we reveal that we are a gift, but that each of us is a gift that is meant to be given away. And so this second level of vocation is, to whom do I give my gift, the gift of me? Do I give that to a spouse? Do I give that to God himself? Do I give that to the church? How do I give that gift of myself? And then the third level of vocation is that level of loving God and loving my neighbor in the practical challenges of everyday life. What does that look like in my classroom? What does that look like in my place of work? This is what we are called to. The good news is that Jesus is faithful and that he is always with us. And so this isn't something we have to go figure out. We have to find the equation that leads to the conclusion that, ding, okay, I'm called to marriage. Okay, I've solved the problem, right? Now I need to figure out who I'm called to marry. No, this is something that God is walking with us on our journey through life. That as we accept that first vocation to allow God to love us, then Jesus begins to accompany us into our state in life and into our daily circumstances of everyday life. And so the ongoing vocation of loving is really allowing God to love me in those everyday circumstances so that I can then treat others from that place of love. There's a lot of different spiritual authors that talk about this. They talk about living out of a place of communion, meaning that I face the challenge of everyday life from my place of communion with Jesus, that Jesus is with me in those challenges. I don't have to face them alone. I like to talk about relaxing into God's love for me and realizing that no matter what's going on around me, the Lord is with me and He loves me. And so I can live from that place of His love, even if in the present circumstances of life, I might find them very challenging. God's love never leaves me, though I'm not always present to it. And so this, I think, is a key to living every level of vocation, is to first allowing the Lord to love me, to live from that place of communion, to relax into His love for me. And from that place of God's love for me, then I'm able to love myself. Then I am able to love others. So in this National Vocations Awareness Week, let's be renewed in all three levels of vocation. The practical everyday ways that I'm called to love and be loved, the more permanent state in life that I have been called to or may be called to, and that deeper universal call to holiness, the call to love God and to love my neighbor with all my heart, with all my soul, and with all my mind, with all my strength. And to have confidence that at every level, Jesus is loving me, and Jesus is giving me the means to fulfill God's calling. So an older gentleman goes to his doctor and he says, by the way, doc, he says, I think my wife might be losing her hearing. He says, what can I do about that? Well, the doctor says, well, you could ask her a question, from a distance and then get closer and closer and see how close you have to be for her to hear you. And he says, okay. So that evening, he's standing in the living room. He says, honey, what's for supper? Nothing. Moves into the dining room. Honey, what's for supper? Nothing. Moves in, walks into the kitchen. Honey, what's for supper? She turns around. For the third time, we're having roast beef.